Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with Let Grow. I'm Andrea Keith. I'm the Executive Director of Let Grow, and today's title is Childhood and Independence and Play, the Foundations of Democracy. And we have a wonderful guest I'm excited to talk with. But before we jump in, I've got a bit of technical and housekeeping items that I get to do. This webinar, including the chat, is being recorded and will be available on our website. All of you attending today will receive a follow-up email with that link, as well as additional links or resources that come up in our event. That will include that chat log. So if anybody shares any links there as well, you'll have access to that afterwards. Our format is an informal interview discussion, and we'll leave the last 15 minutes or so for questions from the audience. Attendees will remain on mute, but you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to enter any questions you would like us to address. We also encourage you to use the chat for comments. But just to note, I am on my own hosting today. I have no assistant to keep track of those things, and I find it difficult to read chat and speak at the same time. So if you have anything that you want specifically addressed within this webinar as a question, please make sure you put it in the Q&A so that we don't miss it in the chat. So I want to start out with why this topic. It's really interesting. I've been with Let Grow for 2.5 years. I've been an educator all my life, essentially. I started out as a public school teacher. I worked in education technology, doing sales, implementation, teacher training, professional development, you name it. I've worn most of those hats. And recently then, about 2.5 years ago, joined Let Grow. And one of the things that I really, really love about this is I feel like my entire career has always been about the success and empowerment of children. So this particular position felt like a dream job, still does, although sometimes it's a little stressful. But this is my dream job where I get to really work on helping change this culture that we have basically created, where kids are overprotected. We're doing everything for them. They're not having the typical childhood that pretty much every previous generation back to the beginning of time has had children playing on their own and doing things for themselves at much younger ages than we do in our countries in particular today. So the reason I wanted to have this discussion with Rachel, I'll introduce her in a moment, from the Bill of Rights Institute, really has to do with the origin story of Let Grow. And so I'm going to share that because I think it's not always obvious to everyone where we started. Lenore Skenazy, our wonderful president and one of our co-founders, is really very well known and has been involved with the free range kids movement ever since she was declared America's worst mom years and years ago for letting her son ride the subway at 9 years old in New York. Keeping in mind he'd lived in New York all of his life, so it wasn't like we flew to New York and dropped a kid on a subway. Anyway, but where this nonprofit really came from started with a couple of our other founders. Daniel Schuckman is our board chair. He's the former long-term chairman of the board of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, or FIRE, which actually just recently changed their name to the Foundation for Individual Rights and Engagement. That's a preeminent nonprofit dedicated to defending free speech on campus, campus being university. And then also another co-founder, Jonathan Haidt, who is extraordinarily well known. He wrote he was a co-author of The Coddling of the American Mind and founder of Heterodox Academy, which is a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring viewpoint diversity on campus. So these two gentlemen had gotten together and had some discussions about what was happening at the university level, their concerns that students coming in were not fully prepared to talk about things that were disturbing. This was in the time of, we were starting with trigger warnings, and kids basically weren't prepared. They hadn't had civics education, and they were working on these within their individual foundations at that level. But they recognized that something had changed or something was happening, or not happening at an earlier age, and decided that we needed to do something about it. They got connected with Lenore Skenazy, who was already working on the idea of childhood independence, and along with Dr. Peter Gray, who is a research psychologist known for his work on the interaction between education and play, and author of Free to Learn. They all got together and founded Let Grow. So the background of our organization really comes from the idea that kids today are not building the skills, the essential skills they need in order to become successful adults. And what we mean by that is they're not learning skills of negotiation, collaboration, getting along with each other, learning how to figure out, how do you keep the play going? How do you figure out, well, so-and-so we don't really like, but he's got the ball. So we need to make sure we figure out how to keep him engaged. These are really important lessons that children learn at an early age. They also learn to become capable and confident in their own abilities and develop an internal locus of control. We will get more into some of that with Rachel, but essentially, our hope as an organization is that bringing back these childhood experiences and allowing children to practice these skills, build these skills, experience some discomfort, frustration, and those types of things is what they need to be prepared to really develop self-agency, the ability to believe they control their own actions and have some control around them, and how that really applies as they become adults. And are they going to be prepared to be the voters, the leaders, the citizens of our future government, be it democracy, republic, however, whatever you want to call it. There is a general premise that these kids need to grow up to be prepared to handle those types of things. So that's really the background of Let Grow and why I'm so excited to talk to Rachel Davison Humphries. Welcome. She is the Director of Outreach at the Bill of Rights Institute. We have been connected and talking for a number of months and really figured out that both of us, as our education background, we were speaking the same language and said, let's put this in a webinar. So let me tell you a little bit about Rachel. She leads the team at Bill of Rights Institute that leads outreach initiatives, designs new programs and products, and supports the relationships that Bill of Rights Institute has with its network of 50,000 teachers. Prior to joining BRI in 2016, Rachel worked for almost a decade as an educator, mentor, and trainer in middle, high school, and university environments, and continues to consult on a variety of education projects. Rachel earned her BA in Liberal Arts from the Great Books program at St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, a teaching certificate in adolescent education, bless you, I always liked the younger kids, from the Association Montessori International, and a master's in learning design and technology at Georgetown University. And I know you also have a couple of little ones at home, so you have a lot of energy. Rachel, welcome. We're so happy to have you here.
Oh, it is such a pleasure. I am so excited to have this conversation. It is my vocation, my life's work, my passion to really think about how educational institutions can better support self-governance.
Absolutely. And so I'd really love to have you start with just some of your personal background, how you came to be in the position you are, your personal journey. How'd you get here?
Yeah, I love telling that story because it's very circuitous, as many millennials have those journeys, living through many unprecedented once in a lifetime events means that your career evolves as the need of the community evolves. And I love that idea of need. I've always struggled with the idea of follow your passion. That was a mantra that was given to me a lot, and that is given to a lot of young people. And I actually find the idea of a vocation much more compelling, and that kind of has guided me. There's a great quote by a philosopher named Frederick Buechner, who says that the definition of vocation is finding the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. And I love that because and that actually comes from David Brooks' book, The Road to Character, as well, where he has this great exploration of this conflict with the idea of following your passion, and that there is a world outside of you, and the idea of following your passion is a very internal, and this idea of vocation and the kind of matching of your own experience, your own skills with some need in the world, really better fits the kind of service to
There's so much
society.
less pressure in that
There's so much less
somehow
pressure in
too.
that. It's much more recognizing things you can know about yourself, like your skills and your aptitudes, as opposed to some kind of amorphous concept of your passion. And now that said, there are a lot of people who, know they want to be a doctor from the time they're 4 years old, right? Like, or know they want to be a professional baseball player from the time they're 3 years old. And those people, good for you. Like, that's amazing. I'm very happy for you. That wasn't the case with me. I have a lot of energy for lots of different things. And I only knew for my whole life that I wanted to help. That was my guiding. Like, I just want to help. I thought that would take me to, I moved to Texas to live with my grandparents when my grandfather was in late stage Parkinson's disease. And I was like, oh, okay. After he passed, it was like medicine. That's how you help people. Medicine's the way to help people. So I became an EMT and did 911 service in Pasadena,
Wow.
Texas. And while I was doing that, I was like, not sure this is really helping the way, like, it's helping, obviously. The kind of straw that broke the camel's back was I was in a CVS and a person came up to me and gave me this big hug and told me all about the call and their grandparent who survived. And I had no idea who this person was. Didn't remember them. I happened to be in uniform, and I had a profound impact on them. And I was like, I'm not sure these are the relationships that I want to be building. I'm not sure. And then when you pick the same people up over and over again, and it's not systemic change, and you're like, how, yes, it's a need, but what more can I do? So at that time, my younger brother was going to college, and he found the book Colleges That Change Lives and brought it home. And I started reading through it, and I found the description of St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I was like, oh, if I want to do great things, I need to know what greatness is. Let me go study the greatest ideas that have ever existed.
Wow.
And so I went to St. John's. While there, I was like, okay, charity, service, nonprofits, that's where I want to be. And I volunteered to go to Katrina cleanup.
Ooh.
And we did some work there. And while there, I was like, I'm not sure charity can really do what we need it to do. We need to get in front of it. How about education? Like, these people, all the support isn't as necessary if you have a well-educated public who's able to take care of themselves. So how do I get into that? And then there's this also great quote. It's actually on my wall over there, which says, if you hate violence and don't believe in politics, the only remaining remedy is education. And so I got into the field of education. It was 2008. There were no jobs in nonprofits anyway. And I was introduced to Montessori pedagogy and this idea that, a free people being self-governed starts at the youngest ages, starts even in the womb, with things that the parent can do at every stage of their development to help support their, what she calls self-generation, the creation of themselves. So that brought me on my career path, and I've been very grateful to work with a variety of lots of different, very innovative, very student agency, self-directed environments. I've been involved with Montessori schools and the Acton Academies and a number of other micro schools and Montessori communities. And then I was actually teaching in Guatemala and had the opportunity to move back to the States when my husband got into a PhD program and started working at the Bill of Rights Institute, so I could blend my interest in kind of deeply self-governing pedagogy with the context of the US experiment in self-governance.
And I like that you use the word experiment. I think it's fascinating how our government works or doesn't work, depending on your opinion, and the history of it. We're such a young country, and we tend to forget that sometimes, just how young we are.
And the idea of true self-governance is young and kind of like contra the dominant impulse of most humans, right? The idea that you wouldn't control others is a radical idea and goes against a lot of our, very well-intentioned impulses.
Well, and look at history. it's an experiment because there's nobody else that we can point to that's doing it. So tell me about Bill of Rights Institute, and what's your mission? What is it you do? What kind of programs do you offer?
Sure. The quick version. So Bill of Rights Institute's been around 20 years. We are a teacher service organization. Our mission is to teach civics. Like the mission statement, we just redid it actually, but the Bill of Rights Institute teaches civics. We equip students and teachers to live the ideals of a free and just society. And then the vision that goes along with that is that we seek an America where more perfectly realize the promise of liberty and equality expressed in the Declaration of Independence. This calls for a civic education that helps students examine the story of our country and exercise the skills of citizenship. So BRI teaches civics. It's what we do. We have a network of now 60,000 teachers across the country. We run professional development and programming, but the kind of root core of what we do is we design resources that support this vision of a free, liberty and equality driven society. And we do that mostly for middle and high school teachers. So we have over 4,000 resources on our website, primary source documents, activities, all designed to be modular and used in classrooms of a variety of kind. Our network includes charter schools, classical schools, homeschoolers, unschoolers, all of the schoolers and not schoolers come to our website for different resources, and we have a lot of partnerships that we work with museum partners, education partners, to homeschool partners to get that work done and to design our resources.
Right. It's interesting to me that your mission statement, by the way, we had just redone ours as well. So I love it when organizations do some introspection and say, okay, how does it fit now? And recognizing the need for civics education. I know that for up to certain generations, civics education was required. I remember it was 12th grade government. I can picture the teacher. He was kind of boring. But I also go back even younger, and I'm trying to decide if I learned things in school or if everything I knew was from Schoolhouse Rock.
You say that, like, I was at PetSmart with my dogs yesterday where I ran into one of my former history students, which was a fabulous experience. She expressed that, it was a really lovely moment, but there were Schoolhouse Rock t-shirts for the dogs.
Oh my God.
And I was like, what world are we living in? But it is such, and actually I was just in conversations with a museum partner about Schoolhouse Rock and the kind of hold it still has, because of the simplicity and the memorability and all of those elements of good teaching pedagogy that it does. That said, it's now, I'm not going to out you, but it's coming up on 40 years old, Schoolhouse.
I know how old I am. Thank you very much, Rachel.
It's coming up on 40 years old. And as wonderful as the songs are, and as, the kind of core functions of government haven't changed in those 40 years. If you wanted to talk 75 years, we could talk about that, having some core functions that have changed. But in the past 40 years, the core functions haven't really changed. And so that they're still relevant. But yeah, I think that does.
We need a refresh.
They do need a refresh. There are a lot of groups working.
Although I can tell you, I absolutely, and I am dating myself, I can sing the preamble.
Many people can because of the song.
And if somehow everything was presented that way, I would have so much more knowledge I could sing.
You would have things you could access. I don't know if that's always knowledge though, and that's where our conversation comes in, right?
Excellent.
You could have content that you would access better, and that is important. Having just the raw data is important for being able to reflect on it. But that reflection and actually the internalization of that knowledge through experience is what creates deep learning.
And that's really what we're here to talk about.
That's what we're here to talk about. And that's the challenge today is what are the experiences that young people are having that allow them to transfer the knowledge out of the classroom and internalize kind of the institutions of self-governance in their own experience in their lives. And as you mentioned in your opening remarks, those opportunities are ever shrinking for that kind of free play that allows them to practice with support from adults when there's conflict, how to govern yourself without an authority, right? And so what form that adult intervention takes is very important. Often you'll see in, in playgrounds, even when children are free playing, the adults step in immediately when there's conflict to avoid, tension. And that one
Right.
outlet. So even when they're doing, what we would want to visually see, it's also what philosophy are they coming to that practice and that activity with is really, really important as well. And that's why I'm so excited and have been following Lenore and the Let Grow kind of evolution for, close to a decade now, and everything you guys are doing, because it is such an important part of what we need to do in order to move forward with the democratic self-governance experiment.
And I know that you use the term self-governance as a very neutral term. I want to make it clear to everyone, this is not political. The Bill of Rights Institute and the curriculum that you have is not slanted politically. It
No,
is understand what these documents say,
right,
what it means, and internalize what those rights are so that you can exercise them, practice them.
Exactly. So BRI, I didn't mention this, but we're a 501c3 nonprofit, non-governmental organization. We're nonpartisan. We accept no federal funding. So no organization has, the government shackles come government shackles. We accept no federal funding at all. And we have a very strong statement of academic integrity that influences our design of our work, that makes sure that it maintains the clarity that it needs to when it comes to our mission, which is to teach civics and equip students and teachers to live the ideals of a free and just society.
Exactly. And I think that's very similar to Let Grow's stance. Is very similar, non-political. We're really concerned about our children growing up to be confident and capable, and whatever philosophy they embrace at whatever point, they definitely need to have this agency and these big words that we're using. So let's talk about when you look at, you're teaching kids the Bill of Rights and freedom and liberty and the different kind of big ideas. They're big ideas.
They're big ideas.
What happens in childhood that, at least in the past, maybe isn't, we would say not so much anymore, that normally prepares kids to then be able to kind of absorb this and learn it as they go?
Yeah, I think so putting it in context, this is not a new concern. So concerns about preparation for the challenges of democracy are as old as the United States. They recognize, the founders talk about the importance of education that prepares. Philosophers for generations have talked about the importance of preparation that prepares. And as you're thinking about what that looks like, I think one of the things that I turn to is Montessori. So I want to share, she is a foundational philosophical figure in my understanding of the importance of young children when it comes to democratic institutions, because she was thinking about it at the turn of the century, and 1906 to 1930 is when she was doing most of her major works. And then she was very involved with supporting children through World War I, less so in World War II because she was much older at that point. But she talks about children as being the forgotten fellow citizen in society, and this is Italy in the 19-teens, and she's saying it at the UN Congress. And actually, it's become a kind of family project. My husband even has written on this topic in a book chapter called Tocquevillian Education for Self-Governance, and he has this quote at the beginning. And I want to just share this quote because it's so powerful. It's from Maria Montessori's Education for a New World. How can we speak of democracy or freedom when from the very beginning of life we mold the child to undergo tyranny, to obey a dictator? How can we expect democracy, when she uses very strong language, when we have reared slaves? Real freedom begins at the beginning of life, not at the adult stage. These people who have been diminished in their powers, made short-sighted, devitalized by mental fatigue, whose bodies have become distorted, whose wills have been broken by elders who say, your will must disappear and mine prevail. How can we expect them, when school life is finished, to accept and use the rights of freedom?
That's powerful. I mean,
So that's
it's very powerful, because I think that we all want what's best for our kids, right? And we parent based on how we were parented in the past to an extent, although there's a lot of that that's changed. Because if
there's
that was
actually been
true,
a
we'd have
reversal, right? Like a lot of people are saying, I want to parent the opposite of
the
the way that I
opposite
was
way.
parented.
So we see a pendulum kind of swinging, and the idea that we're molding children, that children belong to us, and we're creating mini me's. Usually, you know, we want to instill and instill our values, and there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But the understanding that the true goal of parenting is to raise an adult. Uh, so how do we raise the adults so that they are prepared? And what do you see today with some of the kids that are in your civics? I mean, are they even ready to understand the Bill of Rights?
I mean, that's the short answer is, the less experience they have outside of the home, the less experience they have in how to interact with people outside the home. And democracy, self-governance requires that we interact peacefully with people outside our own institutions. If you're looking for another book, so the book on, I have many book recommendations.
By the way, all of this will be coming in the email. Lots of
yes,
links.
they'll come in the email. I'll put them in the chat. But the book I just mentioned is called Exploring the Social and Political Economy of Alexis de Tocqueville. My husband, Andrew Humphries, wrote that chapter. But if you haven't read Peter Gray's Free to Learn, that needs to, if you're in this webinar and this topic spoke to you and you haven't read this book, this is probably one of there are a handful of books that I'll recommend, but Free to Learn is really the recommendation. And in his chapter on the lessons from Sudbury Valley, he talks about how he quotes Greenberg, who was who's the founder of Sudbury Valley, talking about the educational system in our country today is the most un-American institution we have in our midst. That democracy rests on certain like root ideas, and we need to give young people the practice in building up the institutions of using those ideas. So when you limit free play where it's unsupervised, you're no longer giving the children the opportunity to practice the kind of virtues that you've explored with them, or if you're not exploring them. So there's a kind of movement now that exploring some ideas is kind of traumatic for young people, right. And not exposing them in an appropriate way is a protection that you do until they're old enough to understand. But that's actually that can be really challenging, because if they don't have smaller exposures earlier on, then it can be shocking. And sometimes can be more traumatic later on. So when you're thinking about very young children, and I have a 2-year-old, you mentioned that at the top of the conversation. She was born on the 4th of July. I don't know how that happened, but it worked out that she was born to the sound of fireworks.
The fireworks are for her.
Absolutely. This year we didn't go see them because she has a tendency to say too loud, and so we didn't go see the fireworks this year. We saw them from a distance. We didn't like go to a place to see fireworks, but we'll probably definitely see them for the rest of my life as she continues to grow in her abilities. But even at that stage, saying, what are you going to do about that? How are you, what do you think about that? How does that make you feel? Why don't you go ask? All of those things, instead of, there's a phrase again in Montessori that says, never do for the child what they can do for themselves. And so that impulse to protect your child from kind of tensions or like the difficulty of that social interaction.
Any discomfort or frustration.
Exactly. It comes from a loving place.
Absolutely.
And part of our work as people who care about the future of self-governance or democratic institutions or democratic republics, whatever it is that you care about, part of our work is to help even the very young children learn to do that for themselves, learn to mediate conflict.
Right. I think I think it needs to be, I mean, I think we should really paint the picture of what we're seeing in most of society. Obviously, we have let grow, free range parents, and I
And
don't
there
want
are intentional communities and all of the amazing
to
schools who are
absolutely,
doing this work,
but
and a lot of public
yeah.
school educators who are trying to do this work in their classrooms. That you can't, one of the things you can't do in American education is make broad statements.
So I would go even before school, outside of the school day. Previous generations, up until around the 90s, probably, we spent a lot of time outside. Basically, if you talk to certainly my age, I'm a Gen Xer, and you were outside until the streetlights came on. We didn't have cell phones. Our parents generally knew we were somewhere in the neighborhood. There were signals, or I remember, certain dad, when you heard so-and-so's dad whistle, everybody knew it was time to go home, kind of thing. And the kids were out. Mixed age is super important, and unstructured.
And
unsupervised. So you used to see all across America.
Yep.
Any kind of neighborhood in the cities, they played in the streets, in the rural areas. You'd had to get on your bike and ride 3 miles to find your friends, but then they were out running around all day. And that's what you saw. As soon as school was out, the kids came home, dropped off their stuff. Mom, I'm home. And off they go to play. And summertime.
Yeah.
The whole concept of summer as being this wonderful, I have nothing I have to do, has gone away. So what we see now is we see kids not outside. You can drive through all kinds of areas in any part of this country, and what you see are closed garages, nobody out front, frequently nobody out back either. You would have no idea where the children are.
Correct.
And because we are missing that unstructured play, that was when we used to do things like create our own societies.
Yep.
We tend to look at play as being, well, this wasn't learning. Oh, yes, it was.
Right.
And
I think, that's fascinating. So as an elder millennial, I was the last generation of latchkey kids, right? So my mom, working parents didn't have childcare. Starting from when you went to school, you would be dropped off at home. So 5-6-year-olds dropped off at home for a couple of hours, put the chicken nuggets in the toaster, watch the TV, and do what they need to, right? You knew how to do that, and it was expected, and it was normal in our society that would be the case. I don't know why or how that changed. I think
if we had Lenore on here, she
would probably know more about that. I do know it has changed, and that never happens. All of a child's time is structured, and that's where the books like iGen and those sorts of discussions of the use of technology and supervised time versus unsupervised time with Peter Gray really have done a lot of research on this. And the amount of unsupervised hours in a child's week has gone to next to nothing, which means they're incredibly protected from external threats. I would argue that some of what that does is that isolates them in unhealthy psychological ways that creates more internal conflicts for them, possibly. We see a huge rise. There's a correlation between the rise in mental health issues and the rise and the decrease in unsupervised play, because learning how to manage conflict and difficulty is a learned skill. And it's a learned skill.
Well, can't they just teach that in the schools?
That is not how it's learned. So learning is fundamentally a social activity. And this is where learning science comes into. I mean, as an educator, I just think all policy, like most bad policy, is bad epistemology or bad theories of how people understand stuff. But again, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But most most people are like, well, we can just teach that. No, that's the way that packets of information are transferred in a learning environment is very different than the social experience of self-generative like understanding, right? So when you have very young people who don't get to practice on a very small scale how to manage difficulties, whether those are falling off your bike with nobody around, or your friend getting mad at you for something you said, or someone not wanting to do what you want and there's a whole group that's watching, all of those things that happen in kind of free play, unsupervised, are small scale experiments that the child is doing and how other people are going to react to their actions. So when you have a limit in that opportunity to practice gathering reactions, you then that cascades into not being able to be in self-governing environments and expecting that some authority will come in and manage it. Because
not only the self-governing environments, when you think about the fact that so many kids, they don't solve their own problems, somebody else solves them for them. Here, let me do that for you. And we go through school, we're seeing already issues. The pandemic certainly made things worse because it took the social learning part of it completely away. And so what we see is kids who don't know how to behave in a group. And we take these kids and we pump them full of information. Okay, I can regurgitate information about government if I've had civics and things like that. But to then suddenly put them into a situation, be it university, the work world, or just society in general, and expect them to suddenly understand how to get along with others, how maybe not to behave, how to listen, all of these things. We have given them no experiences. And then we're surprised by the results. And I feel like that's part of what Let Grow is really concerned about, be it becoming a citizen who can engage in democracy or choose not to, because that's an option in our country as well. But either way, as you talked about vocation, there is an expectation that they will be able to govern themselves, that they will contribute in some way, that they will support themselves. And yet we don't allow kids to have those experiences. And I think it's a core problem. We've gotten really good at identifying the problem. We look out and we say, okay, these kids are fragile, these kids are anxious, they haven't been able to have these social experiences, and we'll throw in the internet and social media and all of those things. And so it's really easy to look at that. What we're really looking at is Let Grow believes there is a root cause, and the loss of childhood is the cause. That's what we believe. We're working on getting that kind of research. It's a broad statement. It's a strong statement. But I think when you talk to individuals about how they grew up versus how their kids are growing up, most people go, you're right. Why don't I let my child out now? They've got lots of reasons, and a lot of those reasons are
real spurious. It turns
out. Yes, and media and fear-based tactics that are engaged so that we think that there are child predators.
There are dangers everywhere.
Every aisle of Target, there's one stationed at the end. If you let your kids go to the toy department, around every corner. But that's what we're doing. So I find it really interesting when you're talking about how you guys teach some of the Bill of Rights stuff. You had a particular phrase that I found really interesting, and it was talking about the idea of agency. And that kids have to experience some freedom and some self-governance and agency as a child in order to even recognize what that is. But I liked the way you talked about the common purpose and common good. Talk a little bit about those phrases, because I think those apply so beautifully to play.
Yeah. So we've had a lot of conversations. So I hope if I don't hit on exactly the conversation you were talking about, let me know. But so one of the things that free play does is it allows for young people to manage the needs of the community independently. So whatever the community is, if it's two kids in the sandbox, if it's deciding which direction to go on your bikes, whatever it is, they need the opportunity to figure out how to manage that. Because if they don't have that, what ends up happening is that they always expect that someone else will make the decision for them.
Right.
And they'll invite that, they'll want it, right? They'll say, this is how the world works. I don't get to make these decisions. Someone else makes those decisions for me.
And I will just sit here and wait for someone to
I'll just sit here and wait, or I'll go to the authority and ask them to do the thing that I expect them to do. That translates into a shift in what their understanding of the role of government is, because in a child's life, adults are the authority. In their adult lives, government is the authority. Now, that said, this is not a perfect analogy, right? A family is not a democracy for very good reasons that the adult is aware of, right? But go with me for this part of the analogy, which is that when young people have an authority-driven experience for 20 years of their lives, they then, and that's the only experience they have, because every minute of their life is scheduled, right? Whether it's a coach or and it might be beautiful things, like your child is doing these incredible things. They have a coach who does whatever sport it is, and they have their teachers of whatever their musical things are, and they have the directors of whatever the theater things are. And they have all these amazing adults.
They're surrounded by experts.
They're surrounded by wonderful models of like deep understanding who are all telling them what to do.
Yep.
They can't conceive of a world in which they get to decide because they've never experienced it. So then after 20 years of this, when they graduate from college, when they're 22, and they go into the workplace and they go into society, they then say, okay, well, the way the world works is I plead to authorities decide for all of us, and that's how we manage conflict, and that's how we provide resources, and that's how we change policy. It's not, what can I do? Who can I talk to? What collaborators do I have? And so this is like the deep concern that I have for the future of the democratic experiment. That when you have 2 generations now of young people, so the last time you kind of had robust free play in the United States was the 90s.
Yeah.
We have children's children who don't know that now. There's a really serious concern for the future of democracy. So one of the other books I'm going to recommend is called Hayek's Modern Family by the late and very dear to me Stephen Horowitz, who was an economist who thought a lot about free play. He was very close with Peter Gray. I think he was an advisor or spoke to you guys many times. He quotes Lenore in the book a number of times. But he talks about liberal societies are ones in which individuals have learned how to problem solve without the need to invoke violence or some sort of external threat. Developing these skills is central, if largely invisible, foundation of peaceful interaction and cooperation that keeps liberal societies as liberal and free as they are. So again, he's using liberal as like the definitional, not a political phrase. So definitional.
We've changed some of the
not as a political phrase, but as an etymological phrase, which just means free people. So caveat with the terminology there. So then he goes on to say that parenting strategies and laws that make it harder for children to play on their own pose a serious threat to liberal societies by flipping our default setting from figure out how to solve this conflict on your own to invoke force and or third parties whenever conflict arises. A society that weakens the children's ability to learn these skills denies them what they need to learn smooth social interaction. And this coarsening of social interaction that will result in a world of more conflict and violence, and one in which people's first instinct will be to increasingly to invoke coercion by other parties to solve problems that they ought to be able to solve themselves. So that, I mean, that basically just, I have backup for what we were just talking about.
Yeah, we have lots of backup. And I think that when we look at school, so school is an institution, both you and I have been teachers, has changed a lot. And I find it interesting that on the one hand, we have lots and lots of innovative educators out there that are doing amazing things. Acton schools, Montessori are an obvious fit with Let Grow's philosophies. But we also, in every area, we see wonderful, wonderful work, and educators who, I believe every person who goes into education does go into education because they're passionate about kids and helping them succeed.
Yes.
It can be bred out of you
as
you go.
The kind of the long arm of kind of Taylorism, scientific management that makes learning have to be very discrete and measurable is a huge danger to any innovator in education.
But what I see is, having been in ed technology and on the education circuit for years at conferences,
we were talking about that, sharing that
is that I just lost my train of thought. That's the part of being a Gen Xer too, for those of you on the in that range. Got it. What we hear the innovators and a lot of education leaders across the public school system even is a lot of talk about student agency, self-directed learning, personalized learning. The student should own their learning path. All wonderful. Yes. You can't argue with that.
Of course.
And yet, what I feel like they're missing is that only works if a child already has some sense of agency, and if that is also reinforced at home. Yes. If you go to school and they're like, it's okay to fail forward, go ahead and make mistakes, and you need to, what do you want to learn, or any of those things, and the child has grown up in this authoritarian manner, they don't know where to start.
Right, which is why the school choice movement is actually really powerful to do this, right? That parenting and schooling can now be better mirrored in the child's life. And that's an important part of any child's life, is to have the values mirrored in both the institutions that they spend the majority of their time, their school or educational environment and their home environment. And so I think one of the challenges and there are so many, like we were just talking with, Chicago Public Schools has whole teams of people devoted to self-directed learning and engagement. Like they're just, it's not, the vast majority of educators want this for their students. It is that they're hamstrung by some of the institutional stuff when it comes to measurement. And that's where guys like Alfie Kohn, if you're not familiar with him, he has a great essay. He talks about, Punished by Rewards was his kind of breakout book, and the danger that the kind of measurement institution does to the opportunity for young people to have truly, because it's messy, it's not easily able to be measured, it can't easily be recorded for proof of learning to any institution that isn't close. And so this is kind of the bigger issue. If you're not familiar with Taylorism or scientific management in the 1930s.
Let's just jump forward to data-driven instruction.
Data-driven instruction is the long arm of that, right? Like it's the same one line. That is the line for like research-driven instruction or data-driven instruction, and all of the all of the ed tech firms are all giddy about it because they have all the data, but it doesn't mean anything, so I don't care. But that data, that whole proof model comes from the fact that schools are no longer locally controlled.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a school that's very locally controlled, like a private school or a charter school, or a school where or an institution where the parent and administrative relationship is very, very, very strong, then you don't need as much data because the feedback mechanism exists already, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you lose that feedback mechanism by the consolidation of school districts, which was a big part of the 1930s Taylorism kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
or you have state level interventions or federal level interventions, then that becomes a challenge. So there are lots of different layers to like all of this. And there are literally theses and books, and it's a whole industry trying to figure this out for generations now. Dewey was like, we got to fix education, and that was 100 years ago. And so I do want to mention something that is in the chat as well, which is this idea of the safety.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
what does safety mean? What safety means now is a very different thing than it meant 30 years ago.
Yes.
And the expectations of safety have gone to an extreme, in part because of some of like litigious legal institutions here in the US that have allowed it to do that. But also because of a lot of the kind of frantic fear that is a response when something tragic happens. Mm-hmm. And I think part of one of the blessings of modernity is our wealth and privilege. Mm-hmm. We have incredible wealth and privilege, unseen in the world. Like, it is unbelievable the access to resources that the barest American has, the barest child in America has. But with that same wealth comes an idea that because things are so provided for, everything should persist, like it should be easy, right? And that idea that well, if they break an arm, they break an arm, right? That's not I
love that particular analogy, because I was just thinking as you were talking about, obviously LetGrow, we're all for safety. We're not saying that bike helmets and seatbelts are bad. Mm-hmm. But we also think that we have outblown the proportion of what the actual risk is, because previous generations, if you asked my mom, do you figure your kids, will have stitches or a broken bone at some point through their childhood? And she'd say, yeah. That, they'll fall out of a tree, or I fell off of a rocking horse. We won't get into it. But, essentially the parents understood that with the growth and the experimentation and the play came some bumps and bruises, which were in and of themselves learning experiences. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we're so worried that our children not have any harm, not have any injury.
Which comes from a good place. From a good place. But what that ultimately does is doesn't give them the small scale injuries to prevent them from larger scale injuries in the future.
Exactly.
And that's
where they don't know how to handle it.
At all levels, mm-hmm. giving those smaller scale opportunities allows for those larger scale, being able to manage independently those larger scale things that will happen to them in the future, right? So the reason you let kids play on pickler triangles is so that they learn how to climb, so that in the event they are climbing a tree, they know how to do that. Right. And in the same way, you give very young children opportunities to manage their school, like you give them real responsibility on a school, on a school, what are they called? Student council that actually can do things, mm-hmm. so that when they get to governance later on in life, they can do that. Right. And so I think part of, the big concern at all levels is how are we creating opportunities for small scale practice, mm-hmm. so that the larger scale issues never are debilitating.
Exactly. And I think we've been going strong for this whole time. I want to make sure and throw out there, anybody has any questions that you would like to ask Rachel or I, please type them in the Q&A at this point. We've got 5 to 10 minutes or so left. I do also want to give a quick plug, as you mentioned, Rachel, how do we give kids these opportunities? And that's part of what Let Grow is really working for, especially in our play clubs, because we recognize that you can't, one parent saying, I'm going to let my kid go out and play doesn't work when nobody else is outside.
Yeah.
Or somebody down the street calls CPS because there's an unsupervised child in the cul-de-sac.
And, for a little while during the pandemic, we saw a bit of a bump, which was awesome.
We did.
Which was awesome.
And unfortunately last.
I did also recently move to a neighborhood here in Arizona where I saw kids on their bikes without adults around. I was like, we're living here. This is the neighborhood. And there's a house down the street where, there'll be 5 or 6 bikes out front, and that's where everybody is. And they were like dragging each other through the cul-de-sac where one was on a skateboard holding onto a rope. And I was like, that's dangerous. Awesome.
You didn't run out and stop them?
Like one was on a bike and one was on a skateboard holding a rope. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh,
you're like, oh no, that's terribly dangerous.
But did they have helmets on?
Go for it. But I think, and again, it's about a mind shift, a culture shift. Like when I see a kid alone, my immediate thought isn't, oh, are they in danger? For me, it's, oh, that's so amazing. That's so cool that they're, obviously you have to.
I find myself going, what I really want to do is that I want to stop and say, hey, you guys, I'm so excited to see you outside. And they think I'm some.
Now that said, I also am the person who goes up to the group of 12-year-old boys and says, I don't think jumping off this bridge is a good idea. Because I am also that person where I was like, I'm a teacher of adolescence, and I recognize that you are like, I deeply respect you want to do this.
Your frontal lobe is not developed.
Actually, that's it's my responsibility as someone who deeply respects adolescence to help you understand that I don't think this is a good idea. As a random stranger on a bridge.
That brings up the whole idea of it takes a village. Yep. And if adults are acting in that manner, that changes community.
I didn't call the cops on them. I went up and talked to them.
Yes.
Which is a different way of interacting. And I think that's the kind of big project that, Let Grow with their play clubs is fantastic. If you're in a community that has a forest school, if you're not familiar with the forest school kind of communities and models, I highly recommend those. Those are usually for under 5s there, and they take large groups of children into nature appropriately. And basically let them do their thing for hours a day.
Here are the woods, go.
Here are the woods with other children, go. Yep. And you can find them all over the place, but forest schools, Let Grow, any of the Tinker clubs, there are places in our community that are preserving these nurseries of democracy. That's not my phrase. That's actually the phrase that the Supreme Court Justice used in the Tinker case to give children free speech in schools, or give a modicum of free expression in school, to preserve free expression in schools. There had to be a Supreme Court case, which tells you it's not the natural impulse to let young people be independent.
Yes. And I'm going to have to stop you there. Unbelievably, it is. We've hit our full hour. I want to thank you, Rachel. I know that we could have this discussion all day. And I hope this, this prompts some of our audience to have their own discussions with others. I want to also quick plug, since Let Grow is a nonprofit organization, as is Bill of Rights Institute. If you are interested in supporting either of us, we both are 501c3s and need all of the financial donations we can possibly get. But I also want to mention that if you are a parent or an educator who is interested in promoting some of these ideals, the Let Grow school programs are available through our website. I'll include a link in the email. We also have a wonderful independent kids card. I know some of you, we have somebody talking about how they went to 7-Eleven, which for me, I did that all the time. But people look at you funny, or they stop and ask your child, where's your parent? We have a wonderful little card. It's nothing official or legal, but it basically says, no, I am not lost or neglected. My parents know where I am. And
there are t-shirts too, aren't there t-shirts?
Not currently, no,
Okay.
because as I mentioned, we're a small organization and I don't have time to design t-shirts.
So just
But
cards.
anyway,
Wallet cards are important. Wallet cards are great.
yeah, we're working as much as we can and invite everybody to join and help and volunteer or give us ideas because we know there's so much that needs to be done. So thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, those of you who joined us. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. Andrea@letgrow.org, and Rachel, you are
RD Humphries at mybri.org.
all right. We'll include that in the email that everybody will automatically get as soon as we have time to get that out. And please share the recording, let people know what we're talking about. And here's to raising kids who can handle democracy.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you to all of
Thank
you. And if you want to reach out, please do.
All right. Bye.